Everyone, and welcome to another of our series of interviews hosted by the Civic Caucus entitled How Do We Strengthen Trust in Minnesota's Civic Institutions? This is actually the seventh of those conversations, and we are just absolutely thrilled to have with us tonight Lori Sturdevant. We'll give her a little longer introduction in just a moment. We also have a great panelist of two future leaders and two policy veterans. I will be monitoring this discussion. We are going to be focusing on the legacy of Martin Sabo, and Lori Sturdevant has just written a wonderful book about Martin entitled The Making of the Modern Legislature. And we're going to be talking tonight about what we can learn from Martin's career, how it can be used today to recruit and encourage the kind of leadership we need and foster the kind of leadership we need to make the Minnesota Legislature work in the 21st century. So with that, I do want to introduce our panelists. We're very pleased to have with us tonight T. Williams, who has a long history of leadership in Minnesota, an executive director of the Phyllis Weekly Community Center, a leader on the Urban Coalition, Minnesota's first correctional ombudsman, a member of the Minneapolis School Board, and most recently, T, who himself participated in this series of interviews, wrote a wonderful memoir, Rewind. So, T, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Tom Horner, a veteran of civic affairs in Minnesota, 45 years of experience in public policy and politics. Tom is currently writes a political and policy commentary, which is available on Substack, which is wonderful reading, and I encourage everyone to follow him. Tom was an independent candidate for governor in 2010, collecting over 250,000 votes. And certainly relevant to this conversation, Tom was the chief of staff for Senator David Durenberger, and we're pleased to have Tom with us. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we have Chloe Zhao with us. Chloe is a senior at Minnetonka High School. She has been active in Congress and debate in Minnetonka High School, and a future leader we know for sure who will be running for office or something really important someday. And similarly, Ipshita is also with us. Ipshita is a junior at Eden Prairie High School. Thank you, and also a member of the Congress and debate team. Ipshita and Chloe, thank you for being our future leaders on the panel tonight. And finally, I do want to give a very brief introduction of our guest tonight, Lori Sturdevant. Lori is a veteran journalist, 43-year career in the Minneapolis Star Tribune, focusing on state and local politics. I don't know of anybody who has more knowledge and history of the legislature and civic life in Minnesota than Lori does. Lori is the author or editor of 15 books about notable Minnesotans, the most recent of which I just mentioned, which is the book Martin Sabo, The Making of the Modern Legislature. Lori, thank you so much. It's great to have you with us.
Well, Paul, thank you for having me, and thank you to this good panel. I am looking forward to the questions and comments they have about my book, which I'm now going to plug. This is it, Martin Sabo, The Making of the Modern Legislature, published this last fall by Minnesota Historical Society Press and available at a bookstore near you.
It's a wonderful read, so please go out and buy a copy. It's worth every penny. So I'm the moderator tonight, Lori. That means I usually ask the first question and then turn things over to our other panelists. And the question I have for you is you have written or ghostwritten or edited 15 different books on notable Minnesotans. People such as David Durenberger and Harry Davis, I believe, and many, many other civic leaders. My question to start this interview with you is, what, if any, common traits do you see in some of the notable Minnesotans, the traits that serve them well, and the traits that you believe we need in today's leaders? I know that's a big question. You've written a lot of books about a lot of people. What are some of the common threads that you found as you've studied these notable Minnesotans?
Well, thank you for a very provocative question, which has been on my mind since you gave me a preview of it a day or two ago. Because we do have a variety of personalities, colorful ones in Minnesota's panoply of leaders. And so I've had a lot of fun covering those folks through the years. There are some common threads, and I will lift up Martin Sabo, of course, especially today. These people all really valued our democratic system and were believers in the representative democracy that we have created here, believers that representative democracy, as it's been created in the United States and in Minnesota, is a superior system, and it needs the attention and care to keep it functional, to keep it working. They were believers in governance more than politics. I say they use politics as a tool toward governance rather than the other way around. And I'll use an old Lutheran word, befitting Martin Sabo. They had a sense of stewardship, that their mission was not just to amass power or win elections, but their mission was to be good stewards of this institution, this democratic system that we have created here. That sense of stewardship, I think, was present with Martin Sabo, but also with Elmer Anderson and Dave Dernberger and Harry Davis, as you mentioned, and R. Von Fraser, and down the list. They believed that that was their mission.
Wow, what a great place to start with that question of stewardship. Thank you, Lori. Let's jump in now and ask T, our elder statesman, if he has a question for you, Lori. Go right ahead, T.
Did you call on me?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. I was here fidgeting around. I thought
That's quite all right.
I
We'll give
got
you a
some
moment.
new hearing aids, and I thought I'd put them in so I'd be sure to hear. But the point that I want to make, I really appreciate what Lori said about stewardship, and I would add to that, partnership as well. I'm concerned about what Lori thinks about what's happening now and what she thinks uh, uh, Martin might relate to this in terms of working in Washington. That what we had coming out of from where most of my experience with government has, we've seen the federal government not as an adversary, but as a partner or someone where if we were having issues at the state level and the community level, there was often, at least from the community that I came out of, there was often seen the federal government as an opportunity to partner with people in the community to get more services from the state delivered and from other sources. But what we are seeing now is that the federal government seems to be adversarial in these issues, so that our people in the community feel if it's an issue that needs more than what's at the local level, that next level up is not available. We've been abandoned by that. I don't know,
That's a
how.
great question, T. Thank you for that. And I'm reminded that, Lori, that to T's question, Martin referred to himself as a liberal decentralist. He
Yes.
really believed in local and state government. And I just a shout out to you, T. And then I want to, of course, get your answer here, Lori. But T's work on the Urban Coalition in the 60s was absolutely work that involved the federal government helping the state government and working with it. So T, your life and legacy is really reflective of that partnership. So Lori, how do we bring that back, so to speak?
Well, I know that Martin Sabo would certainly agree with you that about the value of that partnership, and I know he would be dismayed by what has become of it in especially this last year and a half, and certainly what has become of that partnership in the last month, two and a half months in Minneapolis during Operation Metro Surge. It's a dismaying time, disorienting time for those of us who looked to the federal government as an ally in trying to prop up civil rights and human rights around this country, and to see the federal government being an agent of violating those rights as the ICE and Border Patrol actions persisted in our city. So this is a disorienting time. Paul, you were right that Martin thought a great deal, as did Elmer Anderson, as did Dave Dernberger, about the federal system that has power vested at the local level, the county level, the state level. We created regional government during Martin's years, regional level, and then the federal level, and each of them playing their rightful role, trying to keep government close to the people, but taking advantage of the money raising and scene setting, context setting role of the federal government. If the federal government isn't reliable, it seems like in Minnesota, it would be a natural thing to look to state government. And fortunately, because of the things that Martin Sabo did in the 1970s to give us a more representative and more activist legislature, I think we can look to our state government, not with absolute confidence, but with some hope, some reasonable hope that there will be some resources at the state level that can help us through troubled times.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. Tom.
Thank you, Lori. Always a pleasure to be with you and such a distinguished panel. So I want to talk a little bit about the environment that really influenced the beginning of the modern legislature, as you chronicle in your book. So one of the biggest events, of course, was the Minnesota Miracle, where Sabo was front and center as the leader on it. But in that environment, in the 70s and into the early 80s, for at least the first 2 years, you had a nonpartisan, non-designated partisan legislature. You had conservatives and liberals, but you didn't have Republicans and Democrats until a couple of years later. Then you had Watergate and kind of the collapse of the Republican Party for a while, but that fed into, for a long time, opposition to abortion was as much a DFL issue as it was a Republican issue, until the likes of Glenn Sherwood, when he made his switch in 1978 to the Democratic Party, culminating then in the 1982 convention, where evangelicals really dominated that Republican convention and really solidified that as the party of social issues in a lot of ways. We certainly had a rural-urban divide, but nothing. I mean, the population was more balanced than it is today. The power was more balanced. Nothing like what we have in Minnesota today between rural and urban. And then lastly, to one of your many areas of expertise, such a huge change in the media environment. I mean, such a robust, not just print environment, but broadcast, TV and radio. I mean, 4 or 5 news broadcast radio stations that were primarily news, with large newsrooms, and no internet. So when you take all of that, Lori, is it ever possible, do you think, to retrieve the kind of spirit, the flow of information, the share of common knowledge, the diminishment of partisan and ideological standings, and get back to what we had in 1971 with the Minnesota Miracle?
Well, thank you, Tom, for a good question. And I appreciate the fact that you and I lived through a lot of what you just described.
Yeah.
It is the case that many of the changes we've seen in our way of functioning together in our society these are irreversible changes. We're not going to go back to 3 big network TV stations and 1 or 2 dominant newspapers in the region, and that's it. There's going to always now, forevermore, I think, be a multiplicity of voices. And that's a big change. The other changes that you mentioned are enduring, I think. But that doesn't I don't think, make the story that I tell in this book, the Martin Sabo story of what happened in the Minnesota Legislature 50 years ago, and then what happened in the Congress when he was head of the House Budget Committee in 1993. Those stories are not irrelevant. In fact, we have just seen in the last several months even a retreat from the legislative branch of government that I think ought to alarm us. We don't have to have such an all-powerful executive that the legislative branch of government is weak and just simply goes along for the ride. Martin would be appalled at that. He intentionally worked and spent his entire 46-year political career in the legislative branch because he valued so much that element of representative democracy, as I think clearly did our nation's founders and designers. They made the Congress Article 1 and gave it the power of the purse, the most important power of government. So we just because we've had a variety of changes, and one of the things I would add to the list is how we pay for politics has changed and not for the better. But the ability for the legislative branch to assert its rightful constitutional authority, I think, is still there, provided there are voices in the legislative branch, like Martin was, willing to insist on it. I think if they would insist, the courts would back them up, and we would have a different situation right now in Washington.
Interesting. Ipshita.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And my question for you would be that over the course of your authorship, having written several books about prominent Minnesota political and legislative figures, how has your writing process or the process of, your research and your experience in authoring and editing these books helped influence your view on what good public policy means in our state?
Oh my, what a good question. Thank you, Ipshita. I guess I used to think years ago that the systems are what matter, and it fits right in with what we've been saying here, to get the systems designed right, get the public policy set up properly, and we'll be fine as a state, that or as a society, to focus on the sort of on the policy was my thought, or on the system by which we govern ourselves. And on those things are important. But over the years of working on these book projects, I've come to a larger appreciation of the qualities of personal leadership. The personalities involved matter, and how they treat each other, how they function in an interpersonal way. I have to say that last night during the State of the Union address, I cringed when President Trump referred to the Democrats as crazy. That's not the way that people talk to each other when they want to work together to accomplish a shared goal, and the shared goal is governing the country. And to have just that example, which grated on me so severely as he was behaving that way, we do better when we have leaders that treat each other with respect, that know how to listen, as Martin Sabo, I think, was a great example for that skill. That those leadership traits I've decided are more important than I used to believe, and it helps me think about about taking care and who we nominate for office and who we elect.
Chloe.
I always try to do my job and incorporate a little bit of the youth voice into some of my questions. So I know that as a young person, my peers and young adults in general, they're one of the largest groups that have a lower level of trust in the federal government and the Minnesota Legislature. And in some ways, I understand that level of skepticism is healthy and actually important for a healthy kind of governing body. So my question is, what do you think a healthy balance would look like, and how would we get there?
I appreciate
So
that.
you're asking that balance between skepticism and belief. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
thank you, Chloe. I've been in the professional skepticism line of work for most of my career, so I don't know if I'm a good person to assess what the healthy balance would be. But because I have come to know so many people at the state government level and the local government level, I have come to trust that by and large, most of them are well motivated. And when we have a chance to become personally acquainted with the people that we elect, and we do have that chance in our political system still, even at the national level, becoming somewhat personally acquainted helps, I think, build a proper level of either trust or skepticism, perhaps. The other thing I'd like to comment about, though, Chloe, is your generation has been subjected to very intentional, highly financed efforts to instill distrust in our system, because there's been at least one political party that has thought that distrust is it to their advantage. And just as eventually a generation ago, the young people were the ones who said they were sick of being lied to by the tobacco industry, for example, and changed their minds about smoking. I think it's possible for young people to realize that perhaps they've been lied to about all that's wrong with our system of government, and that perhaps it's not as corrupt as they've been led to believe, and perhaps there is reason to trust that at least at the local and state level, we have governments that are responsive, and that's the government that Martin Sabo helped to create. So I would hope that there would be skepticism about the cynicism, skepticism about those who would want you to distrust and believe that it's all corrupt. It's not all corrupt in this state, not at all.
Lori, I want to jump in and talk about transparency and accountability. And it seems like so much of the legislative work is behind closed doors.
Way too much.
Obviously, people meet with lobbyists left and right. We have, sometimes it seems like the four leaders just decide what's going to happen, and then within 6 hours in a special session, everybody votes the same way. And we don't. Am I overstating it? It just seemed like there was that the policy making was more public back in Martin's day. Is that true?
You're absolutely right. And it's something that is one of the reasons I'm glad to lift up Martin's story right now. Tom reminded us of what happened in the early 1970s with the Minnesota Miracle, which was created behind closed doors, mostly in meetings at the governor's residence, in meetings that lasted all summer and into the fall. The special session finally ended at the end of October, right at the time of Halloween. Longest special session in state history. The next year, the legislature is on the ballot, and the campaign theme that the minority DFLers, led by Martin Sabo, put forward was openness in government. And it was, I think, kind of an odd choice, an inside baseball kind of a theme for a statewide campaign. And it was not common that legislators in those years ran with a common theme, but Martin urged them to do that, and that was their theme. And it worked. It worked so well that it bucked the national trend. Richard Nixon, the Republican presidential candidate, carried Minnesota in 1972 I'm from South Dakota, and I knew George McGovern, and I hate to say that George didn't run a good campaign, but he did not. But that happened in 1972. But the Minnesota legislature flipped to the DFL for the first time in state history, both the House and Senate, in that 1972 election with the theme openness in government. That theme had potency then. I think it still does. Minnesotans want to be able to hold their politicians accountable, their legislature accountable. They want to feel close to them, to the legislative process. And the fact that we have fallen into this bad habit of a very closed decision-making process at the end of session, it's not healthy. It breeds some distrust. It doesn't take full advantage of the human capital that's on offer there at the legislature, and it's something I think we ought to look at. I know someone else who thinks that way, and that's the fellow who did a lot of legislative reform work in the 1970s and is still with us, Jack Davies.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll let anyone jump in now. Anybody else that has an additional question?
Well, I want to follow up on some of these issues, the broader issues that we've been talking about. And so, Lori, I agree with you. I think there are more people in politics, in political office, who are there for the right reason than not. Mm-hmm. I'm not confident that's going to be true a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 4 years from now, but at least for now. But we still are faced with this dilemma of we now, as voters, as people, we want to live with people like us. And so look at what happened in the elections for the State House of Representatives in 2024. It ended up in a tie, but it ended up in a tie only because you have 20 seats that are truly competitive out of 134, and the other 114 seats were decided by double digits or more. Those elections are being decided in primaries, in state conventions, in caucuses. And it seems to me, but the question is put to you, isn't that producing a more and more investment in ideology, in partisan politics and party loyalty over loyalty to the state and to the country? And can we move around that? Can we change that somehow?
Yeah, you are right, and you point to something. Even in a state that hasn't particularly been gerrymandered, which Minnesota has not been, because our legislative maps, congressional maps, have been drawn by judges, and judges acting on the motion of the likes of Joe Mansky, people who are nonpartisan elections professionals. So we have, among the many states, we are not particularly gerrymandered, but we have chosen as Minnesotans to live in pockets, politically defined pockets. I live in St. Paul. There was just a special election for what was Kaoli Hur's seat, 64A in St. Paul. It was a contested election with a Republican and a DFLer on the ballot, and the DFLer got 95% of the vote. Now, it was at a time when we had ICE agents on the street corner here, 6 blocks away, taking people away, and folks were a little unhappy with the Republicans for doing that. But nevertheless, that speaks to the kind of polarization we have. We have essentially a one-party rule system in much of the inner city of the Twin Cities area, and then another one-party system out in western Minnesota. And that's not good for us. It's not, I also I'm not convinced it will last very long, Tom, because Minnesotans like contests in their politics. They like choices, and we have a system that is open to swings and shifts. We've lived through some of them. So I guess I'd like to think that perhaps some of this will correct itself. But there are things we could look at systematically. One thing I think we ought to look at is going to an independent redistricting commission. It's been luck of the draw that we've had this redistricting done by judges in this state, as you know. It would be a good idea to not rely on luck for the 1931, the 2031 redistricting, and instead to have that by then in the hands of an independent commission, as many states have done. And we could do that. We could put that on the ballot for a constitutional change in on the ballot in this coming election if we wanted to, or certainly before the 2028 election. So that could be done. Another thing we could consider is going back to something we had some in earlier legislative time, having House members running at large within Senate districts rather than having a distinct A and B district. That would allow for more mixing and more opportunity for changes. And then there's one other reform that I'm fond of, and I know, Tom, you are too, and that's ranked choice voting, to allow for there to be a natural bubbling up of third parties. Tom was a candidate with a third party for governor in 2010. And then again, giving people a chance to vote for a third party candidate, knowing that they weren't actually casting a spoiler ballot and causing the election of their actual least favorite candidate on the ballot. We would have, I think, a good deal of political energy unleashed in the state if we had ranked choice voting available to us for state elections.
And
So
I would
Lori,
just add to that,
go ahead.
well, just quickly, I think paired with the ranked choice voting should be open primaries, top 4 primaries, where instead of partisan primaries, everybody runs in the same primary, and it's the top 4 or 3 or 2 or however you designate it, finishers, regardless of partisan affiliation, who then go on to the ranked choice voting general election.
I support that idea as well.
Lori, you mentioned George McGovern, and Chloe and Ipshita would probably be shocked to know that a far left senator ran as a Democrat for the presidency 54 years ago.
From South Dakota.
From South Dakota, yeah. And Tom Harkin, who I liked way back 40 years ago when my wife and I had just become engaged. And but Martin was a farm kid, and he moved and became a quote unquote urban liberal. did he see any of this coming? Was this, or how did we get here where it was never, I think it'd be helpful to have you reflect on an era, especially for Chloe and Ipshita that haven't seen the, where, in farm country, you had Democrats and Republicans, and it wasn't assumed that depending on where you lived, decided what party you were. How did we get here? What does Martin's time tell us about
Well,
all
the how did we get here is a long story that
that? Very long story.
is maybe a topic for another whole conversation here with some historians around the panel. But let me observe that in the prairie states of South Dakota, North Dakota, and in western Minnesota, 100 years ago, there was a real organizing effort among farmers who felt that they were being cheated by the big moneyed interests, the robber barons of the grain industry and the railroad industry in the big city, in the financial industry sector. And there were a variety of reforms that arose from that. The Democratic Farmer Labor Party has its origin name in the Farmer Labor Party that grew out of that in Minnesota. In North Dakota, where Martin Sabo's family was from, it was the Nonpartisan League, very similar to the Farmer Labor Party in many respects, and they were advocating for policies that would give the little people a chance and a voice. And that philosophy, making sure that average working people had a chance and a voice and had government on their side, that was a consistent theme throughout Martin Sabo's 50 years of public life. So in that respect, there are different assessments that people in those circumstances have made through the years about who's truly on their side, what is really their advantage. What I don't like to see is a reversion to a one-party system in that part of the country and in really any part of the country, here in the Twin Cities as well. People deserve to have choice. They deserve to have political contests. They deserve to hear ideas debated and to join in those debates when possible. And we are losing that when we only have one party rule. One of the things that Martin Sabo and his colleague Richard Moe, the head of the DFL party in 1972 rather, insisted that there would be a DFL candidate for every seat in the Minnesota legislature. There had not been. In some races, they had the DFL had not been playing, but they insisted that every district deserved to have at least a choice on the ballot. I think that's a good rule.
Great rule.
I have a concern. I'd like for your comment on it, Lori, that many of our very important institutions of governance, and some in the nonprofit area too, are losing credibility because of the kinds of things that have been happening. And my concern is that it's going to take a couple of generations, for example, what has happened in our Justice Department for the country to have any confidence or faith in it. I'm concerned how these, and so at the local level, some of our institutions have lost credibility, and I'm concerned about and that also have some impact on getting young people and others to consider public service as a career option to them, because what they are seeing now is this deliberate destruction of this credibility. One doesn't want to go into that kind of environment, and it really I'm concerned about how we rebuild this credibility, because without it, we don't have a democracy. Our democracy depends a great deal upon these mediating institutions in our community, both public and non-governmental.
No, I thank you for that good question and comment, T. I absolutely agree with you that we do need institutions, but I would observe they don't necessarily have to be the same institutions we had 50 or 100 years ago.
No.
I think we're about to have a really interesting period in Minneapolis and Minnesota, Minneapolis especially, but in Minnesota, and I'm watching it with just a lot of fascination and curiosity. Some institutions have come through this experience we've just had, I think, looking better than they did, looking more appealing than they did before. I must tell you, I'm a member of a good downtown church, Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church, and our pews are full, and they haven't been for a while. So some institutions are doing well. Some institutions are looking a little weak and shaky and maybe have some work to do to regain some trust. And some institutions maybe are so damaged now that they will fade away and new collections will come into play, will rise up in their stead. We have seen an amazing amount of grassroots organizing in the Twin Cities. Grassroots organizing that probably would not have been possible without social media. My good friend Arvon Fraser, rest her soul, would always talk about the glories of old time organizing. Well, I think that she would be impressed and proud of the organizing we've seen at the grassroots level here in this city with the aid of social media. That's the start of something. That we're not going to just set all that aside. That's the start of something that's going to last and produce, we might not call them institutions, but new kinds of forces that can be mobilized for good and possibly for ill too. We have to look out. But we are at a point of a lot of the old ways changing, and the communication changes that we talked about earlier are a big part of that story. So hang on, T. I think it's human nature to want to exist in this collective or organizations that have a bit of structure and have a purpose. And we will find our way. It may take a while, but we'll find our way to something new and maybe better. Who knows?
Yeah, if I might have a comment, follow up on that, I think it will be critical for those people, the younger youth, Lori, and others who follow this, to really follow what's happening and chronicle it, because we need to look at that history and look at the lessons that the generation later can pick from that, so that they are not making some of the same mistakes. I think a lot is happening, a lot of change, and it's important to document that,
Amen.
and have like your book that's documenting a lot of the things that have happened in relation to the policy. We need to have many others to document that, and then we need to have those who are organized and protesting and everything to pay attention to it. Maybe take a little time out to look at what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. And is there one or two things that I can pick from that might be appropriate for me now? Not to go back. I don't believe we can go back in time, but we can look back in time and see lessons that we can move forward and modify them and make them fit our current situation. And
Well,
thank you for your book.
Well, thank you for your book, T, which does the same thing. I think that your book and some of the things I've written about are looking at a time of that was fruitful for Minnesota. In the late 20th century, Minnesota really pulled away from other states on a variety of quality of life measures, and certainly in terms of economic success. It does us good to study that period and understand why that happened, and try to figure out how we can sustain those gains in our own time now in the 21st century. So
this sounds like a perfect place for Ipshita and Chloe to jump in, because they'll be leading those new and improved institutions.
Yeah, I actually had a question similar to what T was just saying. Throughout this entire Zoom, I've been learning a lot. I've heard a lot of names that I didn't recognize, campaigns and policies, which kind of led me to my question. I'm wondering, what do you think is kind of a disconnect between those like you who are policy experts and those who don't know as much about policy? What's one disconnect you'd like to bridge, or something you would want people like me who aren't as knowledgeable to know?
Oh, thank you. I'll have to think about that for just a bit. That's a very good question. And what popped into my head as you were speaking was a conversation I had with a good friend via email today. This friend is unhappy with the way things have been going, and are especially in Washington, and he thinks the remedy is term limits. That if we just could have our members of Congress be in and out in a matter of 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, perhaps, that would be a great fix. And I had to say to him, because I didn't want to argue with him online, let's talk about this when we're next together. Because I lift up as a counterpoint to that the career of Martin Sabo, who chose at a young age to making government work became his career, his profession, much as he would have chosen to be a college professor or an attorney or a clergyman, that he chose to be a legislator and to make that a high calling, to then find a way to sustain that through getting the approval of the electorate again and again and again, being responsive to the electorate in such a way that the electorate comes to trust you again and again and again. That's of real value. And then to have turn the energies of someone like that into the lifting up of the institution of government, so that the goal is to make government work well, be good stewards of the financial resources, be the trustworthy partner to the people who need the lift that government services like healthcare and housing can provide. Those, all of that, I think, is all of that is of value and of note. So I'm not sure, Chloe, if I'm even close to answering your question, but those are the thoughts that I have about the situation we're in. Beware, I think, of the kind of glib, easy answers that people who just want to shake things up and have a bomb they're ready to throw into our system. That might not be the best way to make a change we'll be satisfied with.
Ipshita, do you want to jump in with those kind of questions?
Absolutely. So, as we talk about the differences between past and present, particularly in Martin Sabo's time in the early 1970s, and the many differences in, the political climate and Minnesotan society during that period, I wanted to ask, when you compare the eras of leaders that you've written about to today's legislature, what feels most different in those aspects?
Hmm. One of the things that has changed is the role of money in our politics, and it's not been a positive story. Martin Sabo was able to run low-cost political campaigns with a lot of shoe leather, and he taught a whole generation, maybe two generations, of Minnesota politicians to campaign in that fashion. There's something about being a representative in a legislative branch of government that there's something of real value in looking your constituents in the eye every 18 months or 2 years, asking for their vote, seeing how they're living, hearing what's on their mind, being personally connected. That is of real value, I think. And that maybe I'm losing my bit of my train of thought there, but that style of campaigning has been lost somewhat as politicians, even at the legislative level, even at the local level, rely more on what money can buy for them rather than what shoe leather provides for them. We still have more grassroots politics in Minnesota than many places, but that's it. Our tradition of person to person grassroots politics is a big part of the Minnesota success story as I perceive it, and it's something I think that's well worth preserving.
Seems like there's this distance now between the elected official and the constituent. So as a council member, somebody calls you because their garbage didn't get picked up or the snow didn't get shoveled, and you're just someone else that has this different role, and they see you, not as somebody over there, but somebody who's, a neighbor. That seems that personal connection, that closeness.
Here's an interesting idea that I'll just lab out there, because the Civic Caucus is a good place to lab out ideas, I think. Minnesota Legislature in the late 19th century was maybe about 115, 120 people. Now it's been 201 people since the middle of the 20th century. And when it was created as a 201 member body, the state population was about 3.5 million, and the state population now is closing in on 6 million. And the question arises, should we consider a redistricting plan in 2031 that would enlarge the legislature and make it more possible again for people to door knock their districts? At the same time you did that, you could also do away with the problem of one chamber having an even number of members and therefore occasionally winding up tied, which we see now, right this minute, doesn't work so well. So I've thought it's time to float the idea that we maybe have a slightly smaller Senate. We now have 67 senators, maybe go down to 55, but then have 3 House members in every Senate district. And then maybe have them run at large. Tom, I talked about that in the earlier question. There are things we could do with that kind of a reforming mentality that might be worth a shot. And it's Martin Sabo was also, he didn't like the word reform. He pushed a lot of reforms and he didn't like the word reform because he thought that the system should always be changing. It should be a continuous progress kind of thing, always dynamic. And the thing that looks like a good reform today is going to produce some unintended consequences and needs to be tweaked again tomorrow. You just keep working on this. That is the spirit with which the Civic Caucus and its founders would approach things. The Citizens League in Minnesota would approach things. You just keep working on this stuff.
One provocative thought coming out of this interview that maybe you'll get some traction.
So, Lori, do you think Martin Sabo could be elected in Minneapolis today?
Yes.
Boy, it's a good, hard question. It's a hard question because he started his political career at age 22 and had the advantage of a lot of energy and a good-looking, young, clean-cut presence, crew cut at the door. But he today would have a hard time getting the DFL endorsement that he was able to run with because he already at age 22, he had the kind of connections that enabled him to get that DFL endorsement back in 1960. One of the stories I tell in the book is about how in 1992, which was the Clarence Thomas year at the federal level, the year of the woman, they called it. And Martin Sabo is running for re-election and back at seeking his congressional seat for what had been the 16th or 18th or 17th time. And he's being challenged by a woman candidate who had never run for Congress before, but who has a little bit of a wind at her back because of the feminist spirit that the whole Clarence Thomas episode had produced in Washington. And so the endorsement contest is not a piece of cake at all. It goes way into the night. It goes till past midnight. I think it goes 10 ballots. Very unusual for a sitting member of Congress to have to face that kind of a struggle to get endorsed. Paul, you're nodding your head. Maybe you were there.
I was there.
Yeah, well, then you can help tell the story. At some point after midnight, the 2 candidates are asked the usual question at these events: will you abide by the party's endorsement? In other words, if you're not endorsed, will you end your candidacy? And Lisa Niebauer was her name, I believe. She said no, she would not make that promise. And Martin Sabo surprised everybody by saying, I will make that promise. He was a man who was about to chair a major committee in the U.S. House. His seniority was such that he was well known and respected in Washington, and yet he was saying, I'll put my career in the hands of the people in this room. Well, they were very impressed and they endorsed him. And she was also true to her word, and she ran against him in the primary, and I think she got 27% of the vote or something like that.
She handed out daisies. And she thought that Martin was too pro-military because that's what I recall. He was funding
because he'd been on defense funding committees and he'd been doing the kind of things you have to do to keep the Army and the Navy funded. Anyway, that story I thought told a lot about Martin's relationship with his party and his respect for the DFL process. He didn't have to take that pledge that night. He could have just gone to the primary and won it anyway. But he wanted
to. I have maybe a related question to follow up with what you asked, Tom. I think a related question would be, would someone like Martin be attracted to serve in the legislature today the same way that he was then? It seems like he saw this as a place where policymaking was front and center. Just so many of the people that I talk to don't see the legislature that way. So, if they have a passion for policymaking, they don't necessarily see that as in the same way that maybe Martin would.
Tom, you want to comment on that?
You know, Paul, I think a person like Martin Sabo, and I'd say the same of Dave Durenberger, would always find a path to be effective in public policy. I think both Sabo and Durenberger probably would have ended up in the legislature when they did, or today, just because that's their nature. But I also think that one of their many talents in both cases, and I know Dave better certainly, and saw this in spades, is that I think he both saw and valued how public policy could be made outside of government,
Mhm.
and not just in the boards and commissions and the nonprofit groups, but you know he was very involved in his kids' school, and he saw in that a way to make sure that all of the kids had an opportunity to learn, to have their different advantages, and I think that was something that made Durenberger and Marty Sabo a good legislator, is that they understood, and Laura, you mentioned this, Paul, you mentioned this, that they understood that the power does come from the community, that authority comes from the community, and that authenticity comes from the community. And I think that's what made them good policymakers and good politicians. I think that is missing today.
Mhm.
You know, and part of it is, why would anybody want to go out and serve in Congress today? I mean,
Right.
just if you're thinking you're going to get something done, well, you look at Congress, and it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats were not quite as futile, but they had their problems certainly. Um, you know, that has become almost an irrelevant institution,
Mhm.
which what a
Mhm.
tragedy.
Yeah,
And our hope is that,
both Martin Sabo and Dave
yep.
Durenberger were outspokenly critical of the move that began in the 1990 after the 1994 election. This was Newt Gingrich's big push to have people not move their families
Right.
to the district, to the Washington D.C. area, but rather to only to become commuter legislators, and only be in Washington 3 or 3.5 or at most 4 days a week. That I was struck when I worked with Dave, Tom, how strongly critical he was of that decision, and the more he talked about it, and then hearing some of the oral histories that Martin Sabo has left us, and he made the same point. They think major mistake that was, because the people didn't really get a chance to know each other on the human level.
And
So what
and
I
I think
want to
you hear a
do,
lot of
go ahead,
that
Tom.
criticism in Minnesota with the John
Mhm.
Marty reforms, that they don't have enough opportunity just to get together over coffee with others in the room where you can have a broader discussion.
Yeah, and as our legislature, of course, because it is redistricted in a regular way, it's more representative of the state, and the state is more metro. So
Yes.
more legislators are going home at night rather than staying in downtown apartments and hotels, and it makes a difference in terms of their ability to connect with each other.
Yep.
Yep. Ultimately, these are human institutions and human connections matter.
Mhm.
What I'd like to move to is what I said we would do towards the end of what has been a great discussion, move into our, what we'll call our lightning round. And maybe we'll go in reverse chronological order, if that's okay. That would mean starting, I think, with Ipshita, and then Chloe, and then you, Tom, and then T as our elder statesman. And the ground rules are somewhere around 30 seconds, 45 seconds if you can. You have a quick final thought and one last question that you still have that you'd like Lori to address. And then, as I said, Lori, we'll have you do the juggling act of deciding what order you want to answer them in, and then perhaps grace us with some final thoughts as well. So,
Okay.
uh, if Sheeta, here's your chance for one last quick question that we can throw into the mill here.
Thank you, Paul. My question for Laura is, do you have any hopes then today as to what young people could gain from reading about Minnesotan legislative figures like Martin Sabo and learning about them in more depth?
Okay, and then we'll have you answer all these
Okay.
once we get them all out. Thank you. And how about you, Chloe?
On the theme of hope, what's something that you've seen that gives you hope for the future of Minnesota legislature?
Oh, excellent. Tom.
Well, I would play off of Chloe's question and ask Lori, is there reason to be optimistic about the future of politicians and politics to actually legislate on behalf of the people they represent?
Great. T. T, do you have one last question for Lori?
T is muted.
T, you're muted. You need to turn on your mic there, T. I tell you what, Lori, why don't you jump in, and then when T figures out his mic, we'll let him jump in.
Okay, well, what could young people gain from looking at back at the late 20th century and some of these figures? Well, I think I hope that they gain inspiration. I think that the people that I've written about have a sort of a timelessness to them. Their aspirations towards service and the impact that they were able to attain through the skills that they acquired and the choices they made I think have a lasting relevance, or I wouldn't have done these books. But I'm more interested, I guess, in the Chloe and Tom questions about how can we find hope and optimism in this moment. And again, I just would reiterate that we have just been through something, an experience with the Minnesota response to Operation Metro Surge that has given me hope. There are so many people who still vitally, deeply care about the shared lives that we've built in this region, in this state, and in this nation too. But this was, in many ways, a rather Minnesota-specific exercise we've just been through. And it has, I think, reminded us of the importance of government, but also shown us what collective citizen action can do for us. And just as people came home from the trauma of World War II, 85 now or more years ago, 90 years ago, and came back with a new enthusiasm for making something of note here in the state. And that period I wrote about in the book I did with Dave Dernberger, which is called When Republicans Were Progressive, that spirit of wanting to urgently work on improving things. We might be heading into a period like that again here. Maybe rather localized to Minnesota, or who knows, depending upon how the next few years go nationally, maybe we'll have that national spirit as well. So I think keeping in touch with each other and keep is a good way to keep hope alive.
So I want to give T a chance to jump in, and I want to give you a chance for some final comments. But
Well,
specific to the legislature, I'm just going to finish this, T, and then I'm going to call on you. So Lori, specific to the legislature, do you see hope? Do you see voices there? And I don't mean to ask you to name names, but are we going to see this reflected in the legislature, do you believe, in the future?
Well, we have a legislative session that is really tough, and I wrote a column last week trying to encourage them to look beyond the usual patterns of partisan division and try to act in such a way that Minnesotans can feel some confidence that their state government has their backs. But there's an election coming, and if Minnesotans aren't happy with their legislature, they know how to make changes. We have a history of legislative control flipping back and forth fairly easily in the state. And we could be heading for another kind of a flip in some way with the election that's coming up.
T, let's give you one last chance, and then Lori. So T, whatever your last question is, and then Lori will let you make whatever.
Mine was, I don't know that mine was so much of a question, but a comment that we have to look at the role that social media has played in this, and how people who are running for public office, and those who are part of their team, how they are used in social media, and I think that it can be very constructive and also counterproductive, and I think anyone who is entering public service, particularly running for public office, needs to be as savvy as possible with how to use social media.
Thank you for a good comment. It's a tool that is still, for those of us who are past a certain age, it still feels like a mighty new tool. But for Chloe and Ipshita and their generation, this is just the one of the natural tools of living. And maybe they can show us some ways that we can use that tool in as constructive a way as possible.
Yes.
So, this is a great chance for a promo because we want to encourage everyone to join the Civic Caucus's LinkedIn account. Make sure that we're connected to you that way, to our YouTube channel. So we have social media, and we're working on expanding our reach. Make sure you go out and get this book, this wonderful book that Lori has written. But Lori, we're going to be getting this. Maybe you can send out some tweets, even if Ipshita and Chloe can help with that, so to make sure we really promote a wonderful interview with you, and whatever final comments you might want to grace us with. But we are so appreciative of you joining us tonight. Any final comments you want to make, Lori?
Oh, you're asking for me for a final comment. Well,
Yes,
I would just say add my
absolutely.
thanks to the Civic Caucus and to you, Paul, for putting this all together. And I do hope that as we reflect on what has befallen us here, we think about not just all that was damaged, all I think certainly we want to remember the lives lost, and we want to wish healing for those that were damaged and hurt by what we've just been through. But let us also look for opportunities, and let us think about how we can amend our systems, our institutions, to make them serve us even better. That willingness to look at both policy changes and good public policy and institutional betterment. I think that was the one of the lessons of the Martin Sabo story.
How about a second Minnesota miracle?
Well, to the extent I'm not sure that when I think Minnesota Miracle, I think school finance and city government, city finance. I'm not sure that's necessarily so broken.
Well, I
But
just mean a bigger picture.
um, but it to the extent that we are thinking about where responsibility for our well-being, our shared interests lie. It
Yes,
may be that we're heading for a time when we want to see more responsibility and opportunity vested at the state level, because we don't now see the federal government in the way that we used to, as T and I were saying earlier.
absolutely.
That might be the next miracle.
Perfect. All right, Lori, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all those who are watching us either now or in the future on our YouTube channel. And stay tuned for our next interview, which will be coming up in March. And until then, we will sign off. Thank you, everyone.